Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, everyone. We are the clergy and staff of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm Rob Schwartz.
I'm John Kennedy.
And we are facing the Gospel from Matthew. We finally get a little break from violence, and there's no sex. This is the third point in America's favorite trifecta, money. So let's hear the text. Matthew 22:15-22. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away.
It's a good one.
Well, John's been quoting Star Wars the last couple times, and I feel like I've been missing out. So to quote one of my favorite Star Wars characters, Admiral Akbar, "It's a trap."
It's true.
He's got to watch out in this one.
I love Admiral Akbar.
Not the first trap and not the last.
That's right.
For Jesus. But we're here in just really following right on last week's gospel. We're marching right through this section of Matthew, and the Pharisees have, tried to trap him every which way, and now they send their disciples.
Yes.
And some Herodians, and so the disciples and the Herodians are not people. I mean, the Pharisees' disciples and the Herodians aren't really people who would get along outside of uniting against Jesus.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, I think the Herodians are sort of loyalists to Rome, open loyalists to Rome, and of course the Pharisees are like the legal gatekeepers of the temple and believe that the Torah is, of course, the only law to follow. So here they are kind of uniting against Jesus, which in itself is sort of interesting.
He's bringing people together,
together.
from opposite sides. That's
Which
beautiful.
is a very Girardian insight.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So, so tell me, what do one of you guys think? That's a little setup.
Well, I think this is a packed little story. I was going to say packed little parable because that's an alliteration, but this is not a parable. It follows parables. But this is getting at the heart of what kind of movement Jesus is leading. What kind of Messiah is he, right? Because as we've been saying for the last few weeks, this stretch of Matthew that we're in all takes place during Holy Week. That is, Palm Sunday has already happened. So the triumphal entry with people waving palm branches and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David," obviously a messianic exclamation. This has already happened. So Jesus is openly, way out in the open now, as a messianic figure. And the question of what to do about money, Roman money, the money of the occupier and the taxes of the occupier demanded by them from the occupied, is a question that strikes right at the heart of who does Jesus think he is and what is he trying to do. A conventional Messiah in the Judaism of Jesus' day might have been expected to refuse to pay the temple tax because a Messiah was commonly thought to be a revolutionary figure. Jesus was a revolutionary figure, was and is revolutionary. But as we're going to unpack, I think, and of course as we've been exploring all throughout this podcast, really, revolutionary in a different sort of way. So it's super interesting.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And he's in this situation. It seems like, well, I would start out by saying I like how they started off almost like kind of flattering Jesus a little bit, throwing some compliments, even though it's really like, you're so impartial and you don't worry about the opinions and whatever you say. And right off the bat, he's calling them hypocrites because he's like, "Come on, that's not really what you think of me." But also, it's really just language they're putting out there. So when he does lean one way or another, they can be like, "Aha, see what he thinks." And if Jesus says, that if he's in favor of the taxes, the people are going to be upset with him, especially those who are oppressed and who are really hit by this tax. And if he goes the other way and says, like you were just saying, if he says, no, forget the taxes, he's more on the side of God and the people and all that, then all of a sudden now the government's got reason to really come after him. And just like in all the things, he used parables to kind of prove his point. Now he's using an object lesson. And I love that he says, who's got a coin on them? Jesus doesn't just pull out a coin with the emperor's image on it. And it said, basically compares the emperor to God and the language on it.
It does.
But here come the Pharisees, right, are the ones to pull out the coin in the temple with an image of, someone else that they're saying is God. So,
and there's the hypocrites.
Right, it's like, boom.
So, let's talk about that coin, because that the Bible doesn't tell us that, right? This is sort of extra research we have to turn to know exactly what the significance of this coin is. So Rob, you already touched on it, but the coin would have the image of the emperor, as the text does tell us. But what the text doesn't tell us is what it probably said, which was, wait a tick, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus.
There you go.
So son of God.
Right.
Which is idolatry, right? The Old Testament prohibits the use of images of people on or gods on money.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really what this is about. I think, if we just back up a second, this is in a string of encounters he's in the midst of in the temple, after he's just told all those parables that we've been hearing the last 3 or 4 weeks. And now they're down to their next plan B strategies of trying to trap him with law questions and stuff. And so it's really not a question about taxes, because the Deuteronomy already says it's okay to pay the taxes, but it's more a question of authority and how to pay the taxes, And so it's not like, the Pharisees pay the tax. They don't openly, they resent it openly and they complain about it, but it's the zealots and stuff who protest and don't want to pay it. And then, and I've read that zealot movement that was triggered by the institution of this tax when Judea became a Roman state, that sort of rebellion is what eventually led to the terrible war that took down the temple, 60 years later. So this confrontation with Jesus is to sort of see how far he'll go, I think. And this is all following that first question of, by whose authority do you do all these things? And it seems like this is an easy one. It's like they're throwing him the easiest pitch and they think they're really going to get him. But he's like, here you are carrying the coin in your pocket in the temple.
Right.
And I like that when they're flattery to him, they kind of step right in it, because they're saying to him, you show no partiality. They've heard him take on their bosses, the Pharisees, or their teachers, and they've heard him not even regard their authority with partiality.
Right.
So I think that might be what they're saying is, you're brave enough to speak your mind. What do you think, really? Tell us a way out of school, what we can really, how far can we go? So he's so brilliant. He's no way he's going to step in the trap. And he always turns these things around to trap the people who are trying to entrap him. But the coin is something. Yeah.
You're right. I mean, I'm astonished again and again by Jesus's quickness on his feet. There's a good book that I turn to often, generally, and for these podcasts, called "The Kingdom Within" by John Sanford, who is an Episcopal priest and a Jungian analyst. And Jung's thought was the basis for the Myers-Briggs personality test. He's actually had nothing to do with the Myers-Briggs test as a thing. So if you don't like Myers-Briggs, don't hold that against Jung. But he talked about the thinking function and the feeling function, and Jesus was just incredibly developed in both.
Right.
He responded. He was emotionally available and connected to what was going on around him and who was around him and what they were going through. But equally, he was very intellectually sharp. I mean, he says the things that I think most of us, certainly me, later think about. Like if we had somebody said something to us we didn't know what to say. Caught us off guard. In the moment, we're like, and then later, like, oh, that's what I should have said.
Right.
He says it just right away.
He's got it.
Yeah, he totally does.
It's the shadow side he doesn't really have on the Jungian.
I guess so, being the Son of God and all. But just to say that what he says here is very, very kind of ingenious, I would say. Not kind of, truly ingenious. This is not an obvious response. This seems like a pretty good trap that's been laid for him. But he finds his way out of it, and he turns it back on them. First of all, I just love the use of hypocrite, because I think as I know we've talked about on the podcast before, hypocrite means actor in Greek.
Oh, right.
And the actual translation, I didn't write it down here, but it has something to do with one who interprets from beneath, which is a reference to the masks worn in Hellenistic theater, in Greek theater. So Jesus is telling them that you're not sincere, you're not authentic, you're just acting. This is not, your whole lifestyle is not an expression of true piety, but rather it's a show,
Right.
Which is obviously quite a dig, but one that seems, in this case anyway, and so many others in the Gospels, merited. This passage is used for answering the question of what Christians' relationship to political power could be. I don't know if it's a one-size-fits-all. I don't think it is. But this idea that, this question of the image, right? So the image of Caesar is on the coin. And Jesus says, if that's whose image is on it, give it back to him. Almost to say, like, of what value, of what ultimate worth, of what importance really is this coin? It's just something that's floating around in the world, whatever. That's kind of what I take his attitude to be. But the subtext here is any Jew, certainly the Jews Jesus was talking to, would know whose image is stamped on us, right? The image of God.
Right.
And so...
Right in Genesis, right?
Yeah, right. The first chapter. Humankind, male and female, everybody made in the image of God. So if something, little coin that has Caesar's image on it needs to be given back to Caesar, what does that say about what we need to be doing, what we need to, who we need to be giving ourselves over to every day? And if we're hypocrites, we're not doing that.
Right.
It calls for the deepest devotion and commitment. As Yoda said, to be a Jedi requires the deepest commitment.
That's right. There's going to be more Star Wars quotes as we go. Don't worry, folks. No.
And this is, of course, a major theme in Matthew.
Yes, absolutely.
In the parables that precede this, we see, the vineyard owner expects the good fruits of those he left in charge of his vineyard. Well, this is what Jesus is calling forth from his hearers as well, from his people.
Well, and that's a big theme throughout Matthew. What fruit do you bear, and what fruit comes of what you're doing, and all of that. And I think it's kind of almost open-ended, except for give this coin back to Caesar because it's Caesar's, but he doesn't really spell out all the details of how do you know what is Caesar's, how do you know what is God's, and all of that. And so it's left up to their interpretation, and it's almost like live into it. Like whatever you say you believe is God's, live into that, and if you do, the fruit that's produced from it will show if you're really living into the ways of this world or the ways of the kingdom, so to speak. And if you're saying one thing and doing another, then you're being a hypocrite, like we're saying. So even that comes into play there. Yeah. I think he's really trying to show that. But I really like what you said there, John, about really thinking through the image that's stamped on us, the image that we're created in, and living into that. Yeah.
I think it's a wholesale dichotomy where Jesus is saying, render to Caesar what's Caesar's. He could have done full stop there, like that's the answer to their question, right? But he goes beyond it to say, and give to God what is God's. And as you've kind of spelled out, and, if we're God's coins stamped in the image of God, that means our whole selves, I love that line in the Rite One Eucharist.
Yes.
We render unto thee, O Lord, ourselves, our souls and bodies.
It's too bad that's not in the right tune anyway.
I know. It's really lack. It's it's one of the things I think would have been a good carryover. Yeah. But to say our souls and our bodies, it's the physical, our whole entire selves. And the other thing I think is striking about this answer Jesus gives is there's no, divine attribution to paying your taxes in the
Yes.
civic life. Just pay them. And
Right.
you're living on this earth, so participate. But it also, like James Allison points out, he's one of my favorite teachers in that Girardian school. He points out that it's through Christianity, really, that we got the secularization of law and government in our
Fascinating.
modern world, and that Jesus sort of teaches us in this passage in a way to de-divinize any form of human government or law, that they're to be worked through as any human thing is, and while keeping our obedience and allegiance to God, we work through these human things as best we can, and try to make sure we can obey the laws that we have without being unfaithful to the way of Jesus. And Jesus is the one who comes to kind of show that, what's underneath all of our systems, which is basically usually some form of violence or scapegoating or oppression, but when we're working with the systems we have and rendering ourselves unto God, our souls and bodies, sometimes we have to take great risks or work hard to change laws that we can't obey if it's not in keeping, or, not obeyable by all of the people, or not accessible. And, Jesus, at least as we've discussed and I think been learning, is that Jesus is on the side of the victims and, the most vulnerable in society. So anyway, I think that's, as you started us out, John, this is like a very rich, packed,
It is, yeah.
seemingly straightforward passage, but there's so much, so many implications in it for us.
We looked at this and said,
true.
this is such a short one, and yet there's so
Yeah.
much in
Yeah.
there.
Right.
So the length of it does not necessarily mean there's nothing to say.
But
That's
Jesus
for
is,
sure.
he's really, talking about this idea that there's nothing divine about human authority at all, and actually Jesus' authority covers all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking
Supersedes
how,
all of it, I should say.
I don't think the intention of the Enlightenment and the American Revolution and so on was to follow Jesus.
I don't think so. It was to divinize our whole system.
I know,
Yeah.
actually, as I say that, I know not everybody exactly thinks that, but, look at the Jefferson Bible. He was not, he was a sort of a secular Christian, but it kind of gives us the opportunity, to live into some of this a little bit more than in the days when it seemed like religion had more status, when indeed religion did have more status, when, it was, whether it was the days of the Holy Roman Empire and so on in the Middle Ages, or, even in England, or the mother of our own church, right? We're part of the Anglican Communion, where even now the monarch is the head of the church and defender of the faith and so on. That when you have that arrangement, you miss these subtleties, and you miss the radical, and by radical I mean like the what's at the root of what Jesus was about. Jesus was not about setting up a new power structure to go along and compete with others, and to take their place, even though that's how things played out, post Constantine. Constantine, of course, being the emperor who not made Christianity the imperial religion, but paved the way for it by converting to it and legalizing it, because before that they were a persecuted minority. But yeah, there are some, I think about this a lot, because obviously, we went to our Berkeley and Yale Divinity School convocation yesterday, and in the sermon, and just going to things like that, we hear about the narrative of decline. Not that they're pushing it, but it's just part of the conversation, right? That obviously church numbers are down in the Episcopal Church, and every church, just about, and not just an Episcopalian problem, but this era of religion becoming quite marginal. Presents some opportunities, actually, for more faithful living and a deeper understanding of what Jesus is actually about.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Sorry, I keep knocking this table around today. And I like that Jesus really, the fact that he, like I was saying before, he kind of leaves it a little open-ended. He's telling them, like, think for yourself here, do the work yourself. And I think that's a challenge in us. Like, we do have, our teachings and our things that we hear in church, but then it's also on us to wrestle with these ideas and things like that. And I think there's a lot to that. And so that's kind of one of the extra things I was taking away with this. It's like for us to figure out and wrestle with.
Yeah.
And just jumping to my T-shirt, because I didn't mention my T-shirt last week, but that's okay. And I didn't really have anything too theological, but I have my Smash the Patriarchy shirt on today, and I thought Caesar probably wouldn't be a fan of that. And now that I think about it, I'm guessing the Pharisees and the Herodians probably would have some issues with that,
I think
too.
they're pretty into the patriarchy.
They're pretty into the patriarchy.
Right.
And if Little Caesars wants to send me a T-shirt to wear, we may, do a little product placement there. Yeah, right?
Under Armour, Little Caesars.
Get it all on here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky. Our society's become quite murky when it comes to summoning God to endorse all of our wars and our money. It's on our money still. Not to get into that controversy, but it is tricky as a Christian to decide what is God's and what is the nation's, and that they are not the same. And not always this. Well, they're not the same. So even to say that is sort of a controversial statement in today's world, I think. But anyway, I think we're at the end of our time. We've really dug out a lot of great richness from this passage, and we invite all of you to please engage with us. Leave us a voicemail with your thoughts and responses and challenges to our points of view. The number for our podcast line is 203-442-5002. Leave us a voicemail. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in church.